Hello, I'm Robert, fact checker and science blogger, and helping if you're scared of things. And this is the infodemic that's going around that Bill Gates has a plan to inject you with microchips. This is what a microchip looks like for a pet. Big thing, like a grain of rice. You can't fit them into a normal vaccine needle, a great big needle that's big enough to fit one of those in. It would be very, very obvious, and then you have a lump left under your skin. There's no way that someone is going to surreptitiously inject one of these into people. And then you'd be able to detect it with an RFID scanner as well. So you can inject it, but you can inject it with absolutely huge 12-gauge needles. And then to a bit more technical detail about that, you can make some really quite small chips that work. You can make a dust-sized 400 by 400 micron chip. That's still not quite, technically you could just fit it into the largest needles used for vaccines, but you would need to you need to have something around it, obviously, to protect your body from it and protect it from your body. So no, you couldn't. And in any case, it would need an extra antenna. You can only read it, a dust-sized one, from a few millimeters distance. So even if something right against your skin, depending how deep it is, you might be able to read it. And so unless you attach an external antenna, so they would have to inject this thing and then attach an antenna onto your arm, which would be pretty obvious. And then there's one very tiny experimental one, which is so tiny you could fit it inside a cell, a rather large cell. But in this case, it's the same thing. So the thing is that they don't have any battery inside them, these chips. So they have an antenna, and they are passively powered by the microwaves that you shine at them. Then its antenna converts that into power, does a little bit of calculation, and it sends a signal back. It's almost like a reflection, but a kind of calculated reflection, where it reflects back with a little bit more information in it, because it gets some power from the incoming thing, and then use that to generate an outgoing signal, which you can nowadays do very efficiently. Generate a signal if you've got enough power from quite a small area, but that's the problem of the power. So it gets it from the incoming, so it needs an antenna to power it. And so this very tiny one, and you could 22 microns. That's a micron is 1,000th of a millimeter. Then that one you can read it, but you can only read it from a distance of 5 microns. In other words, less than the diameter of the thing. So that's a very tiny 0.005 millimeters. And basically, to read that, you'd need to put your reader into your body and somehow manage to position it right next to the chip wherever it is. That's totally impossible. It's only useful for experimentally studying cells in the blood in a microfluid, in tiny channels for channeling fluid around on a chip. And so you'd have a special tiny fluid channel, and then a reader below that, and then you have to maintain this cell in position within 5 microns above your reader. And then if you do that, you can only discover very basic things about it. For instance, it could tell you the pH inside the cell or something like that. So it's of technical interest for researchers into cells. It's of no interest at all for locating people or anything like that. And then they say that this chip supposedly has a GPS tracker in it. This is what a GPS tracker looks like. And you can't make them very small. You certainly couldn't inject one. You could have an operation in which to insert a big lumpy thing like that onto your skin, but you would also have to replace the battery from time to time, because they need or have a recharging point attached to your skin, a kind of plug attached to your skin which you can use to recharge the battery of your GPS tracker. Again, it would be totally obvious, and the whole thing is utterly pointless because none of this is needed for vaccines. And why they focus on this particular vaccine, and there's been so many different vaccines. Bill Gates is involved in funding the campaign to eliminate polio. So why do they think that they've got a chip in this, not a chip in the polio vaccine? And why don't they think they've got it in measles vaccine or whatever? I know they talk about measles, but they've got lots of mistakes about that. But why particularly with this vaccine have a GPS tracker in it? It's not possible anyway. It's totally impossible. And then you do get some other ideas. So there's a rather cool idea, but it's useless for vaccine. So this is the idea that you would have a digestible RFID chip in your pill. So pills that you swallow are large enough to be able to include that rice grain sized RFID chip, which you could then swallow, goes through your body, and the whole thing is digestible. And then the microchip dissolves in your stomach, and as it's going down, it can give out a signal which would just be picked up by a device you wear and tells the doctor that you took your pills that day. And I wouldn't mind one of those. I've got to take 2 pills of something every day, and this would just beep, beep, you've taken your pills. So that's quite a useful thing, but it's absolutely nothing to do with tracking people. Another thing that comes up is the idea of syringes with RFID labels, and that's just a way of checking how the things get distributed around. The RFID labels don't get attached to the patient. They're just a tracking device for the syringes. And then enforced microchips are illegal in many states. Here, these are states they all have in all of those it would be illegal to put in microchips. And the reason for doing that, it's quite strange if you're not in the United States, is because they believe there's going to be a rising of an antichrist who is going to mark people. Now, if you read the passage, it's nothing it doesn't really fit the idea of microchips. If you look at the Bible, it says that the beast is going to require people to worship him, and then people who are not, the second beast will kill anyone who doesn't worship the image of the first beast, and will cause this mark to be put on all those. There's nothing involved. There's no element of worship when you get vaccinated. You're not required to worship anyone, and nobody kills you if you don't get vaccinated. So the connection with this biblical passage is absolutely remote, very remote. Indeed, it's hard to think of any situation that could arise today where you get a mark on your body, and if you don't do it, and you have to worship someone in order to do that, and that you'll get killed if it doesn't happen. That is something that made some sense in the 1st century AD, because there was an element of emperor worship, and the number there, the 666, is likely to be connected with the Emperor Nero. Indeed, it was a very easy puzzle for the reader of those days. That 616 probably originally they could solve that puzzle. It wasn't meant to be difficult to solve. And so there's just this idea that's sprung up that has very little connection with the actual Bible. It just that somehow microchips could be some way of controlling you. And then there's the nanodots tattoo, and this is ink, not chips. This is for people without medical health records. So I have a medical health record. You probably have one if you're watching this. But there may be if there's someone watching here from sub-Saharan Africa and who's watching it on your mobile device, but you don't have a medical record, then you're the ones this is for. And people like that, then it actually makes things really difficult, because if you haven't got them, if you can't prove your identity, then for instance, you can't get a driving license, you can't vote, you can't open a bank account, and you have no medical records in the health system of your own country. And something like 1 million people in the world are in that situation today. Basically, they don't exist in modern society, and it's these people that this nanodots tattoo is meant for. But it is actually they're actually, and it's just a tattoo. It's not a chip. It's not doing anything. It's a kind of ink that is visible in near infrared, but invisible in ordinary light. This is just a concept. It's not actually going to. I'd be surprised is probably one of these many concepts that never actually comes to anything, because they're looking at a much, this is the different, this is the views on that. It's much likely, so we have a digital ID already. You almost certainly have a digital ID, but it's less for these people. And it's 1 billion people in the world, sorry, not a million. There are 1 billion people in the world, including 20 million children, who don't have any way to prove their identity. And so impossible for those 1 billion people to get a bank account in a normal way, or to vote, or to have a medical record. I didn't realise there was quite so many like that, and makes it really difficult for them to navigate present day society. So with Bill Gates' foundation, 1 billion, I mean that's sort of like 20% or something. 1 billion, no, it's between a seventh and an eighth of the world population. More than an eighth of the world population, more than 1 person in 8, can't prove that they exist. So the Gates Foundation is researching into digital IDs to help these people, and that's what the ID 2020 Alliance is all about. And loads of conspiracy theories about it. But it's really about giving these 1 billion people a way to prove that they exist. And to do that, then it's actually not so much those nanodots. It's likely to be either retinal patterns or fingerprints or some form of biometrics. So they would have a digital ID, and most of them nowadays have very common to have apps, or at least access to someone you know who's got an app, and then with a fingerprint reader on it, you touch it, and it not an app, a tablet, mobile phone thing, and that's very, very widespread nowadays. You would touch it, and then that would unlock it for you, and then you would then give permission. You yourself would be there to let them add to your record. So there isn't any secret record that someone else can access. The person with the digital ID would be there to unlock their record, to show it to people and let it be added to. So it's a very secure way of doing it that they're looking into. And so there's so many conspiracies about it, but it's a very good thing that they're working on. And so, for instance, only half of children under 5 years old in the whole of sub-Saharan Africa are registered at birth. So half of the children south of the Sahara in Africa don't have an official identity, and so they don't have a health record. So you can imagine if you're trying to vaccinate people in sub-Saharan Africa and you've got to give them 2 doses especially, and you've got to do them 3 weeks apart, and a logistical nightmare to try and find the same child that you vaccinated 3 weeks ago to give them the vaccine again, and you're going to rely on them remembering it or something. So it'll be easier if you have a single dose, and be much harder that most of these vaccines seem to going to need 2 doses and at a distance apart. So that's why they're looking at the digital ID is especially relevant to rolling out the vaccine for COVID-19. So a similar situation for unemployed homeless people in Austin, Texas. They don't have the personal records to access housing benefits and medical care. And again, the whole thing is totally voluntary. They're in control of the whole thing. And so people again bring that up and say, look, they're forcing this digital ID on homeless people in Texas. They aren't. It's something that they can actually benefit from. It's not about a centralized database, because the only people who can read it are the ones who have the fingerprint, who can open it. And it's their solution to this problem, and for people who don't have any documents or any database records in any system. And so there wouldn't be a central database for all of them. There could be I think it's just tied to your imprint. I don't think it's any way for anyone to access it without your fingerprint. Then the people talk a lot about conspiracy theories. Talk about some other Gates conspiracy theories. So first of all, Bill Gates on computing, he was nothing to do with microchips. He said never had anything to do with development of microchips. His work was on the operating systems and software. And of course, Windows computers use microchips, but he didn't develop microchips himself. And he resigned as the CEO of Microsoft in the year 2000 to focus on his work on philanthropy. By then he was a multi-billionaire. He never needed to work again in his life. And he could all the luxuries he wants, he could get. So all these ideas that he's doing it for some financial motive makes no sense. He's got all the money he needs, and he said he's giving away billions of dollars every year. When you're that wealthy, then your money, if you use it, if you invest it wisely, then it's almost impossible for it to go down. And they keep on these wealthy billionaires can constantly keep giving out. If you're a multi-billionaire like Gates, you can give away billions of dollars every year, and still you've still got billions and billions and billions of dollars left. That's what he's doing for the rest of his life. And he's finally stepped down in 2020 from attending meetings altogether, but he stopped working there full time in 2008. And so in 2013, then Steve Ballmer, who followed him, made a big mistake by hugely investing in the Surface RT, which didn't work out. That was a kind of version of Windows that didn't have the desktop and couldn't run normal desktop programs. And he thought lots of people would want this, and very few people did. Anyway, so and then you sometimes hear, so he's no longer anything connected with Microsoft. He's totally stopped all connections in 2020. He isn't doing anything there. He just advises them, but he's not spending much time on that. He's there. He's an informal advisor. He's no longer a member of the Microsoft board. He hasn't done much there, and he's just taking up time that he wants to do for his philanthropy. And you sometimes hear people say that Bill Gates stole the early code for MS-DOS, the first operating system that developed into Windows. So I know some of you will be thinking, oh, I'm whitewashing him, but it's actually the other way around. There have been people blackwashing him as a philanthropist for many years. And whenever you're prominent and very wealthy, you attract conspiracy theories like this. And if you go and look closely at it, there's really nothing there at all. And so what happened is that Microsoft licensed 86-DOS to IBM, which they bought from Tim Patterson. Now, I mean, of course, they made a lot of money. They didn't actually. You can look at the financial thing, that maybe Tim Patterson could have gotten more money from Microsoft, but they didn't actually tell him who they were licensing it, to use it for. So you get things like that, which you get in any kind of commercial situation. But that's about the worst you can say about them. Tim Patterson is the one, it's not Bill Gates, it's Tim Patterson who was accused of stealing the operating system from CPM, which is another operating system. But he says that all he did was to read the manual for CPM and then reverse engineer 86-DOS out of that, and that is legal. So you look at the manual, you see how it's done, you don't look at the actual code. And this is being used at the moment, for instance, by Wine on Linux to emulate the Windows operating system, and that's considered, certainly Windows hasn't taken any legal case against that. And Wine is considered to be legal, that it lets the Linux, let them run Windows programs on Linux by emulating the Wine operating system. They do it the same way. They read the programming and they don't look at any of the code, even any code that's actually been published. They just don't look at it. And that is legal, or at least it's not illegal. And back then it was also very clear it was legal. And so nowadays, the source code for 86-DOS and source code for CPM from the time, it's both been made public. And it's very easy, if one copied the other, it would be very easy to find the code that he copied. And that was really quite a few years ago that they both were published, and nobody has found any proof that Tim Patterson copied. So even if it was true it was Tim Patterson, not Bill Gates, who did the copying, but there doesn't seem to be any truth to it. It seems that what Tim Patterson said was in fact correct, that he did a reverse engineering by reading the manual, which is perfectly legal. So what I've just debunked here is believed by 28% of the US population, the whole microchips thing, and then many programmers, for instance, would believe that Microsoft stole the CPM code. And if you have looked into the history, and then even if you're a programmer, you may well believe that. I'd heard this rumour, I never checked it up, I hadn't come to a personal decision about what I thought had happened, but because of during this debunking I checked, and it didn't happen. It's absolutely conclusive. And so, and then that's a little bit about how the 28% of Americans believe that false rumour, and people don't understand there's a sort of blurring between science fiction and reality, that people think that they see science fiction, they sort of think, oh well, what they can do, we can do, and so probably you have a scanner and scan a planet scan Mars from Earth, and scan for human beings on Mars, or scan for life on Mars from Earth, or something like that. You can't do that. We don't have this miraculous technology. We don't even know how to begin to make it. And the same way, we don't have any way to scan people who've got some tiny chip in them from a distance of any distance, even from, as you saw, from even distance of nanometers, even distance of micrometers. And if it was that small to fit into a vaccine, Neil, you certainly wouldn't be able to read it meters away. Even millimeters. You couldn't even read it from millimeters. Yes. So now, what else do I have to do? So 28% could make a difference. We are getting vaccine hesitancy going down as prominent people. So they discovered the best way to deal with vaccine hesitancy is for people that people respect to get vaccinated, for medical professionals to get vaccinated, and the politicians in the United States. Who did we have? The actor from, I think the actor who played what's his name in Harry Potter. I think it was him. I'm not sure. Who played the headmaster at Hogwarts. Anyway, whoever it was, and if we get people like that getting vaccinated, that's helping to deal with vaccine hesitancy. And but anyway, so and then the aim is not to perpetually vaccinate you. If we can, if the vaccines can stop transmission, and that's still not proven, we know they stop the serious disease. Big question that's still to be proven is whether they stop transmission. I was just reading today that there's some evidence that AstraZeneca stopped 69% of transmission if you have the half dose first and the full dose regime, but they need better data on that. And the other ones, Pfizer, are going to find out sometime in the first quarter of 2021. So a few months from now, 1, 2, 3 months from now, we should start to know if they stop secondary transmission, and then if so, then we can use the vaccine as an addition to everything else. And personally, I think it's very likely they do, based on what I've read. But because I've got this preliminary data from AstraZeneca, and then we've also got that it's like better than natural immunity. There's not so much reinfection of natural immunity, and then there's the it seems the vaccines may turn the symptomatic into asymptomatic infection, but even if they do that, then asymptomatic infection in cluster investigation has led to seems to be very rare when it's totally asymptomatic and not pre-symptomatic. So I don't know if that applies to the vaccine, but if it does, just turn them into cases like that. It's very rare they infect anyone. So, anyway, we'll see what happens. Right, so some of this is probably, some people are just very scared of needles, some people even faint, and some people find it just terrifying, the idea of being injected with a needle, and they just can't bear the idea. It's just very difficult for them. So that may possibly be a factor in some of the vaccine hesitancy, and the vaccines in tablet form we have those on their way in phase 1, and they're heading towards phase 3 eventually. I expect with the high success with all the others, I think these will have possibilities too. And so, yeah, the rest of it's all about how vaccines work. I've probably talked about most of this before. So I'm just saying that, if you don't wish to take a vaccine for religious, philosophical or other reasons, then do the physical distancing to protect yourself. Do that anyway. Even if you've got a vaccine, then you may still be infected, you may still infect others. So continue to do the physical distancing and everything else just as you've done before. And it isn't impossible. A few percent of those with 1 in 20 of those with the Pfizer vaccine, which is the best we have so far, did get infected after they had the vaccine. And none of them developed serious disease. In one of the trials, I can't remember which was, Pfizer or Moderna, in one of the trials, I think it was Pfizer, one of them, the vaccinated ones, developed a serious disease. So you're not totally prevented from serious disease, and it's too early to know if it prevents deaths, but it greatly reduces them. So you do continue to protect yourself if you've got a vaccine. Don't think that you're invulnerable. You can still get sickness, it's just much less likely, and it hugely reduces your risk of dying. But it's maybe not all the way down to zero. We may have millions now vaccinated. We may well hear the first cases of people who die of COVID who've been vaccinated, because that has not been proven to be impossible. So don't feel the vaccine has failed. If we get this news story, it's almost bound, not bound to happen, but it's based on those figures, then it wouldn't be a surprise if you get someone who dies who has been vaccinated, who dies of COVID. It doesn't mean the vaccine doesn't work. It's working very well. And the vaccines are very safe. Anyway, I've talked about all this before, because this is no longer really about Bill Gates. Yes, so, just quick, not much to go. I'll just do another couple of minutes. Okay, so the vaccines are very safe, and the reason we could be so fast is all this overlapping in the speed. So normally, they would do it, they do these preliminary preclinical trials, they'd write it all up, probably months later before it's finally peer-reviewed. Then they'd submit the peer-reviewed publication to referees, and they'd have to do a kind of funding, then they have to do a kind of funding round, trying to persuade someone that it's worth funding phase 1, and then the same thing again in phase 1, same thing again in phase 2. They actually overlapped. Phase 3 indeed often overlapped just the preliminary results for phase 1, already starting phase 2, preliminary results for phase 2 and still continuing phase 1, and they already started phase 3. They do things like that. No, I think, but certainly this overlapped with phase 2. Not sure if it overlapped. Phase 1 that does continue all the way through right to present. Certainly phase 3 started before publication of the phase 1 results in many cases. And then all along the time they were building up the manufacture, and so by then they're already ready to manufacture. And then we have much larger clinical trials than the normal, and so across multiple countries, tens of thousands. Then you've got many similar vaccines, all using the same method of the spike, presenting the spike. And so the huge amount of safety data now, over 100,000 people. I think half of those vaccinates, that'd be about 50,000 people being vaccinated that have had it for 2 months, and quite a lot from phase 1. a few dozen here and a few dozen there from all the different trials, given they're all so very similar, I think we can be reassured that it's a very, very, very safe vaccine. But the proper approval, this is emergency use authorization, the proper approval will not be for another 4 months or so, because there's a very small, there's possibility of, the main thing they're concerned about is the same thing that would happen with a natural disease. So they're not talking about anything specific to the vaccines, but specific to the body's immune response. And the question really is whether vaccinating someone, triggering an immune response to COVID-19, same but probably much more effective than the natural. The natural immune response is likely to be less effective, because once the virus is spreading through your body, it starts attacking your immune system, which helps to hide the virus from your immune system and make it less effective against fighting back against it. The vaccine doesn't do that, because the vaccine doesn't attack your body at all. It just stimulates the immune response. So the vaccine is much safer than the virus, which the vaccine does create lots of spikes in some of the cells for the Moderna one, but they just go off into the bloodstream and do nothing, and so it's totally harmless. And but your body said, "Oh, that's something I don't recognise," and develops an immune response to it. So the main question about long-term effects of the vaccine is whether the immune response triggered by the spikes could attack something else in your body, whether they recognise something that actually closely resembles something else in your body that your body actually needs. In other words, a kind of autoimmune response. And the evidence, if the evidence so far from the vaccines, then it's there's all the phase 1 studies, there have been no examples of autoimmune response like that, and that's 6 months data. And then you've got 2 months data for these maybe 50,000 or more already, and then you've got all the other ones ongoing and producing their results gradually, just not discovering this. And we should see it in 2 months. We should see it, at least in some people, it should have started within 2 months if this was going to happen. So in order to do a proper full authorization, then they need another 4 months. They need a total of 6 months data from the start of phase 3. So that takes us towards the end of the spring, and by then they'll be able to do the full authorization, which then will be a very final, very clear. But it's certainly got the level. If you're at significant risk of COVID-19, then its risk-benefit analysis, the emergency use authorization, is well above that bar. And I would say it's pretty much all the way towards the final bar, because there's so much data that these vaccines are very, very, very safe. And as we vaccinate millions of people, we'll expect to get these very rare 1 in a million reactions. There's a possibility of being allergic to the ingredients in the Pfizer vaccine. I don't think there are any cases yet of being allergic to the vaccine itself. And so that's something you have to look out for as you gradually do. So what they're doing at the moment is a phase 4 study, basically. Emergency use authorization, phase 4. They have to do follow-up, or they should do follow-up observations, and asking people some weeks later, have you had any bad symptoms and so on, and checking up on everyone. And so it's really the largest, very massive phase 4 study is what's going on at the moment. Which phase 4 is where everyone is vaccinated, and you just look at the effects of the vaccination on larger and larger numbers of people, until eventually you've got so many people that it's absolutely clear that it's a very safe vaccine, which it is already. So anyway, so I suppose this is really quite relevant. So because hopefully, if you've been one of the people believing this conspiracy theory, I hope that you started off, you gradually began to see that the conspiracy theory is false, and then as I've got to the end, then hopefully you start to see that the vaccine is very safe. So it does actually make sense putting it all like that. And then I have a separate video about it, that the messenger RNA vaccine is it does not do anything to your DNA or RNA. It doesn't change anything. It's just a recipe for the spikes. And the recipe is read by your cells in order to make lots and lots of spikes. The spikes are completely harmless. They're a very normal thing for entering a cell, and there's no DNA or RNA in those either. So the protein spikes, you don't need to worry about those going through your body. It's just a very ordinary bit of thing, but the body doesn't recognise it, so it attacks it. And then the spikes can't replicate, the RNA, messenger RNA, can't replicate, because the body has no way of replicating messenger RNA. The virus itself is very ingenious. When it gets into a cell, it constructs its own replication factory inside the cell. It gathers together various components from the cell and puts them together in such a way that they manage to replicate RNA, which is not normally possible in a human cell. So very ingenious, the actual virus. But the vaccine doesn't have that. They only have the instructions for making the spike. They don't have the instructions for making this big complex virus replication factory in the cell. They just go in and make the spikes, and make lots of spikes, and that's it. Then soon the recipe is gone, and then the spikes are gone. And so it's a very, very, very safe way of doing this. And people who say, oh, I'd much rather just get the disease and then maybe I got some immunity from that, that's very, very unsafe. You're doing far more to your body with the disease. You're injecting a virus which is harming your immune system, attacking your immune system, attacking your cells, attacking the lining of your lungs. It causes all sorts of effects. It has an anticoagulant effect. It causes inflammation, but then without it can harm your digestive system. It does something to your sense of taste and smell. It can cause a great deal of fatigue. So that it's not flu. It has some resemblances to flu, but it does many things to your body. And then eventually, if you get it bad, then eventually you end up with multi-organ failure. That's the worst effect of this virus. And in the worst cases, it's a very, very serious disease in its worst case. And then you have the cytokine storm, which affects some very young children, even some young children, very, 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 very rare, extremely unlikely. But you have autoimmune response kind of effects. And you have, there's the anticoagulant that they found recently, which is not a good thing to have. And it's a new disease, and it's astonishing the range of things it does to our bodies, and they're still finding out. They still haven't reached an end of understanding everything it does to you. You don't want to be infected by a disease like this, even though nearly everyone has it mild, gets over it quickly. But the 1 in 5 have long COVID, so they have symptoms go on and on, affecting on your lungs, on your heart, on your sense of taste, on your digestion, not being able to eat very well, and so on, going on and on and on for months on end, and being very tired and hardly be able to do anything. You don't want to get this disease. The vaccine is the way to go. Don't try and make yourself immune by getting the disease. It's not even going to be very effective, because it may be short duration. The virus itself attacks your immune system, so the very last thing you want, if you want to develop an immune response to the virus, is to have the virus attack your immune system. So instead, use the vaccine, which doesn't attack your immune system and doesn't do anything to your body, and all it does is to show these spikes, these protein spikes to your body, and so to your protein spike, your body then says, protein spikes like that, I've got the antibodies for that already, I know how to deal with that. And it just goes, it's a little bit like you've got a bit of clockwork, and you stick little bits into it in random places, and your clock will stop ticking. And basically, that's how your antibodies work. Your body develops antibodies which home in on particular spots on the spike, and the spike is a very complex machine, really. that shows itself to the cell, and if you've got this an antibody stuck in one bit or another, then the spike can't get it. The cell has looked at the spike and says, I don't know what this is, I'm not going to let you in. So that's basically what the antibodies do, and the vaccine triggers your body to generate antibodies to the spike, and then the spike is gone, the RNA is gone, your body remembers how to attack the spike. Then if the virus gets into you, your body sees the spikes attached to the virus and says, oh, I know how to attack that, and it goes and messes up with it so it can't get into your cells anymore. And that basically is how you get protected from COVID-19, by being vaccinated, and it's just a sensible thing to do. So as soon as it gets down to my age group, I'll be first in the line. Well, I won't jump the line, but when it's my turn, then I'll be definitely want this vaccine.